Good afternoon and welcome to Matters Financial and Geopolitical from a Frontier. I don't know where to start because it's been an extraordinary opening since the middle of the night. On the 24th of February, I wrote, "The viral moment has arrived," and it certainly arrived for the market today. First of all, just have a look at this. This is COVID 2019, total number of confirmed cases during the first 60 days since the first case was reported. And this best explains what I've been talking about when I've been talking about nonlinear, exponential, and multiplicative. Basically, you can have a small number to begin with, but once you do, it goes up practically in that Gladwellian straight line. Crude oil fell as much as 30%, fell below $30. We're currently, but I don't know where we're going to end up by the time you're watching this podcast, at $30.42. In a historic move, US yields briefly crashed. That's the 10-year below 0.5%, hit an all-time low of 0.4655%. The entire US Treasury yield curve from 3 months to 30 years is now below 1% for the first time on record. The S&P, Dow Jones, and Russell 200 futures were all limit down, which is 5%. The Treasury market's fear gauge, the TY VIX, the VIX equivalent for the 10-year note, is 6.56 standard deviations above its one-year average. The Z-score has only been higher once, in July 2007, and that speaks to the parabola. It is a curve each of them feels unmistakably. It is the parabola. They must have guessed once or twice, guessed and refused to believe that everything always collectively had been moving toward that purified shape latent in the sky, that shape of no return, no second chance, no return. And I'd written last year when the mood was darkening, and I said then there is certainly a fin de siècle, even apocalyptic mood afoot, and indeed there is. Insane. Oil down 25%, US futures fall 5%, triggering halt. Best performing market in Asia is down 2%. DAX futures down the most in 11 years. Yen gains the most since Brexit in 2016. Warren Buffett, a bull market is like sex. It feels best just before it ends, and it has ended. As I said in a response to Bianco Research, the bull market was virucided. Trump says the Federal Reserve should cut interest rates and stimulate the economy. He is totally out of his depth. That's the point. And I don't mind if you're American, whoever you are, this is that moment when you lift the curtain in The Wizard of Oz and you find somebody behind it who's just a normal human being. The market slump is just beginning. COVID-19 is not the cause, it's the catalyst. Zero Hedge article, this is it, the party is over. The world is now facing the gravest economic and social downturn in modern times. This means that an investor in the Dow has doubled his money every 6 years on average over a 40-year period. The coming downturn will not take 40 years. When bubbles burst, everything unravels very quickly. In this article, they're suggesting sell the Dow and buy gold, and I think that's correct. You're going to get these bouts of weakness in gold as people look for cash to service margin calls, but ultimately that thing is going to go north. I was tweeting a few days ago, 5,000 from here. The Federal Reserve is firing blanks. It's a debacle compounded by deluded linear leadership. This was a chart from Friday via FX Pip Titan of the Dow, and we're currently showing it down 1,277 points. If there ever was a signal, it was Dr. Tedros a few days ago saying global markets need to stop panicking over the coronavirus. As I said, what is becoming increasingly clear is that the world economists and policymakers are linear in their thinking and are flummoxed by the exponential multiplicative nature of the coronavirus. If the Fed cuts to zero, and they will, the Dow Jones will be 5,000 points lower. I wrote that, and we're already 1,272 points lower. I said that is the conundrum. 24th of February, I was saying gold has liftoff, that I look for $2,000. The viral moment has arrived, and indeed it will. The purest geopolitical proxy in the markets is gold. As Ben Bernanke once said, people hold gold as protection against what we call tail risks, really, really bad outcomes. Gold, in my view, as I said on the 24th of February, is correlated to the coronavirus, which is set to turn parabolic and is already non-linear and exponential, something that the market understood this weekend and has escape velocity. Richmond Federal Reserve Bank President Tom Barkin said a few weeks ago, but to my mind, central banks can't come up with vaccines. And that's the point. They were talking at one point about a V-shaped recovery. That is a fantasy. The oil market opened this morning with Brent and WTI plunging more than 30% immediately, the largest one-day drop since January 17, 1991, which was the start of the Gulf War. Oil on Friday was set for its fourth biggest daily fall since 2008-2009, and that's just followed through. And this is all because the Saudis are planning a big oil output hike, beginning an all-out price war. Plans to increase oil output next month, looking to boost it well above 10 million barrels a day as the kingdom responds aggressively to the collapse of its OPEC Plus alliance with Russia. Saudi Arabia has privately told some market participants it could raise production much higher if needed to a record of 12 million barrels a day. With demand being ravaged by the coronavirus outbreak, opening the taps like that would throw the oil market into chaos, which is precisely what's happened. It's the equivalent of a declaration of war, said a commodities hedge fund manager. The shock and awe Saudi strategy could be an attempt to impose maximum pain in the quickest possible way to Russia and other producers in an effort to bring them back to the negotiating table, and then quickly reverse the production surge and start cutting output. If a deal is achieved, it's not going to work. Putin has been preparing for this moment much longer than the Saudis, and he has a buffer of hundreds of billions of dollars, mostly in gold. So we've got an extremely volatile situation that's developing there, and the impact on oil producers is going to be horrible and nightmarish. This is a comparison by Holger of the United States, Saudi Arabia, and Russia's oil production. Nouriel, Trump's response to pandemics was dumb. Minimize the problem and number of tests to minimize the headcount and avoid panic. But this way, the pandemic's spreading faster and more widely, leading to a spike in cases in weeks to come. So Trump's tricks, I like it low, will blow on his face. That took me to Ozymandias. I met a traveler from an antique land who said two vast and trunkless legs of stone stand in the desert. Near them on the sand, half sunk, a shattered visage lies, whose frown and wrinkled lip and sneer of cold command tell that its sculptor well those passions read, which yet survive stamped on these lifeless things, the hand that mocked them and the heart that fed. And this refers to Trump. And on the pedestal these words appear: my name is Ozymandias, King of Kings. Look on my works, ye mighty, and despair. Nothing beside remains round the decay of that colossal wreck. Boundless and bare, the lone and level sands stretch far away. Of Africa and mystical captures, there's photos via Jambo magazine. I like these paintings by Gerhard Richter. This is Detail of Forest 5 from 2005. This is 3 paintings from Richter's Cage series at the Met Breuer via New York Times. And finally, September repaints a media image of the destruction of the World Trade Center and obscures it with streaks of blue and grey. International Women's Day, Arati Kumar Rao. My weekend reading has been La Peste by Albert Camus. Listen to this. A pestilence. In this respect, our townsfolk were like everybody else, wrapped up in themselves. In other words, they were humanists. They disbelieved in pestilences. A pestilence isn't a thing made to man's measure. Therefore, we tell ourselves that pestilence is a mere bogey of the mind, a bad dream that will pass away. But it doesn't always pass away, and from one bad dream to another, it is men who pass away, and the humanists first of all, because they have taken no precautions. Then in another passage, he's talking about a priest. For a long while, God gazed down on this town with eyes of compassion. But he grew weary of waiting. His eternal hope was too long deferred. And now he has turned his face away from us. And so God's light withdrawn, we walk in darkness, in the thick darkness of this plague. I also watched, on the recommendation of a friend of mine, Ingmar Bergman's The Seventh Seal, which I recommend you watch as well. I also read the New Yorker article from 1997 by Malcolm Gladwell, The Deadliest Virus Ever Known. The Spanish flu epidemic of 1918 reached virtually every country, killing so many people so quickly that some cities were forced to convert streetcars into hearses. And then apparently, looking to sort of understand the actual flu itself, there are some bodies which were buried in 800 miles from the North Pole. The bodies of the 7 miners may well be intact, cryogenically preserved in the tundra. And if so, the flu virus they caught on board the Forsetti, the deadliest virus that the world has ever known, may still be down there with them. Say you're doing an autopsy, he gestured to indicate a body spread out on the desk in front of him. If it melts, there may be a mucousy secondary blood product, some type of liquid exudation. The liquid seeping out of that material may suddenly, by mistake, be aerosolized and someone inhales it. You just don't want to take any chances. And then he's writing about scientists knowing that global outbreaks of deadly influenza go back at least 400 years, and that there have been 2 more since 1918. The Asian flu of 1957, which killed 70,000 Americans, and the Hong Kong flu, which killed 33,000 during the winter of 1968-1969. This is interesting. If you got the flu last winter, for example, chances are you came down with H3N2 Wuhan. 35995. That is a virus with number 3, hemagglutinin, number 2, neuraminidase, which was the 359th sample isolated from the Wuhan area of China in 1995. That's why that Wuhan name appeared in that book everyone keeps referring to. Over the past few years, the Center for Disease Control has funded 10 flu laboratories in China. The number of strains sent to the CDC from China every year has now reached 200, up from about a dozen several years ago. For there to be an pandemic, there has to be a strain to which all or most of the population has no immunity, and that is capable of spreading from person to person, Nancy Arden. So far, this doesn't meet the second criterion. That was in 1997. As Gladwell said, the tipping point moment in an epidemic is when a virus reaches critical mass. It is the boiling point. It's the moment on the graph when the line starts to shoot straight upwards. In Saudi Arabia, detentions occurred early Friday morning when guards from the royal court wearing masks and dressed in black arrived at the homes of the two men, took them into custody and searched their homes according to people familiar with the matter. I've written severally, but the article to read is 13th of November 2017, a 32-year-old wannabe king. So, I think although they're on the offensive, they were on the offensive in Yemen, I'm not convinced about the strategy. Rajapaksa is a keen follower of developments in India. He understands finally that animals are more important than human beings. Badra punchline. If I see it's just the flu one more time, I may puke. Chi girl, and I can't agree more with her. There are so many folks who are of that Camus description and just won't do the maths and then keep coming back and saying, but it's just the flu. And so I want to say, do the maths and stop telling me I'm not interested. I've done the maths. As I said, what is absolutely clear now is that we're dealing with a virus that has turned exponential and non-linear and is a pandemic. And Tedros can say whatever he wants. And really, his words are purely worthless. The viral moment has arrived. And let's just look at the politics. A Biden November victory shouldn't be discounted, says AM Live Mon. Actually, it's my base case scenario now. Because Joe Biden is essentially, Trump has been viricided. His response here has been so pathetic. It has been so wrong. And its political consequences are going to be for all of us to see in the next few days. Trump CDC doctors say, how do you know so much about this? Maybe I have a natural ability. He doesn't. And I went back to the word Narcissus. The term originated from Greek mythology, where the young Narcissus falls in love with his own image reflected in a pool of water. I said a few weeks ago a non-linear and exponential virus represents the greatest risk to a control machine. I was talking about China, but it applies 100% to Trump. Trump at Mar-a-Lago yesterday, I'm not concerned at all, the president said when asked about coronavirus getting closer to the White House. We'll hold tremendous rallies, he said. Rallies will continue. And that took me back to a comment from the Chinese professor, but it applies to Trump as well. What is thriving, however, is all that ridiculous red culture and the nauseating adulation that his system heaps on itself via shameless pro-party hacks who chirrup hosannas at every turn. And really, his whole reaction has been frightening for its narcissism, its incompetence, and its Shakespeare-level hubris. The president's remarks at the CDC were a repudiation of good science and good crisis management from inside one of the world's most respected scientific institutions. Which took me to Groucho Marx. Who are you going to believe? Me, i.e. Trump, or your own eyes? You've passed out $100 bills to rich people when the economy was great and pennies to poor people when the markets were tanking. The economy was slowing down and people were dying. It's going to be a pretty potent attack line for Democrats this year. Who will win the 2020 US presidential election? This is from Predicted. Click on the link. I think the Viricide means Trump. It's a massive sell. Added new data point on the exponential Italian ICU trend, doubling every 2.6 days. It's one of the most alarming charts I've ever seen because, one, trend has been very stable for weeks, even with Italy mitigation measures. Two, if it continues, health system collapses within 2 weeks. Star Wars for real, have a look at this video. Lombardy Intensive Care Association raises the possibility of triaging intensive treatment to those most likely to survive. That is the tipping point. The US has about 2.8 hospital beds per 1,000 people. With a population of 330 million, this is 1 million beds. At any given time, 65% of those beds are already occupied. A super thread by Liz Specht. That leaves about 330,000 beds available nationwide, perhaps a bit fewer this time of year with the regular flu season. By this estimate, by about May 8th, all open hospital beds in the US will be filled. This says nothing, of course, about whether these beds are suitable for isolation of patients with a highly infectious virus. If we're wrong by a factor of 2 regarding the fraction of severe cases, that only changes the timeline of bed saturation by 6 days in either direction. If 20% of cases require hospitalization, we run out of beds by May 2nd. Importantly, I cannot stress this enough, even if I'm wrong, even very wrong, it only changes the timeline by days or weeks. This is how exponential growth is an immunologically naive population works. Undeserved panic does no one any good, but neither does ill-informed complacency. People aren't adequately grasping the national and global systemic burden wrought by this swift-moving disease. Multiple respected epidemiologists have estimated that 20 to 70% of the world will be infected within the next year. If you use 6-day doubling rate I mentioned above, we land at 2.6 billion infected by sometime in July of this year. And that is, the Gladwellian reality. And what I worry about is that Groucho Marx level moment, who are you going to believe? The number of confirmed virus cases in the US exceeded 200 and test kits remained in short supply. Yet 2 Trump aides described the outbreak as contained. Contained has the look and feel of a famous lost word. Great figure on countries, new emerging COVID-2019 epidemics. Is it just me or does it look like it's speeding up recently? Dr. Eric Ding. As I said, viruses exhibit non-linear and exponential characteristics. Coronavirus outbreak numbers by date. February 18 in Italy, there were 3 cases. March 7, there were 5,883 cases. And have a look at this chart. Total confirmed cases in Italy, Germany, France, United Kingdom, Spain during the first 60 days, log scale. Iran's coronavirus response, pride, paranoia, secrecy, chaos. The authorities seem as worried about controlling information as they are about controlling the virus. Applies to the US, applies to China. Italy, not so much. Nearly 3 dozen Iranian government officials and members of parliament are infected and a senior advisor to the supreme leader has died. Authorities seem as worried about controlling information as they are about controlling the virus, according to telephonic interviews and text messages with more than 6 Iranian medical workers. We were screaming at the health ministry that we have 594 corona patients, but the ministry was telling us, since you don't have positive test results, we won't give you equipment you need. They kept saying, wait, 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 and then suddenly they announce you're an epicenter. We've known from day one we are an epicenter. They are lurching from crisis to crisis, trying to band-aid each crisis. The borders of mismanagement and ignorance are being rapidly redrawn by the health ministry. I feel sorry for us because we're sitting in a sinking boat that you are managing. Based on the numbers, testimonies and proof that we have received, the number of dead and infected people is far higher than what is announced. I refer to Iran as at the Hunter-Thompsonian age. There is no honest way to explain it, because the only people who really know where it is are the ones who have gone over. Imam Khamenei is seen leading the funeral prayer for General Soleimani and General al-Mohandes. President Macron says the coronavirus epidemic is unstoppable in France. What is absolutely clear is we're dealing with a virus that has turned exponential, non-linear, and is a pandemic. And I wouldn't worry about what who's got to say about it. Iran overview of daily cases, total of March 8, 6,566 cases, 194 deaths, 2,134 recovered. Now, Great Game India has done some research, scientific investigation on mysterious origin of coronavirus. The fierce epidemic broke into public view for the first time with an internal circular of the Wuhan Municipal Health and Health Commission circulating on the internet. The circular clearly stated pneumonia patients of unknown cause have appeared in our South China seafood market. Guan Yi, a well-known Hong Kong SARS expert, later criticized this measure was equivalent to destroying the crime scene when they cleaned up the seafood market. At this point, the statement that the South China seafood market is the source of the epidemic became the official conclusion. The paper, titled Clinical Features of New Coronavirus Infected Patients, was published in The Lancet on January 24. The first patient had an onset of disease on December 1st, which was not associated with the seafood market. Not associated with the seafood market. Relatively clear that the South China seafood market should not be the sole source of new coronavirus, but honestly, we still don't know where the virus came from. Now it seems clear that the seafood market is not the only origin of the virus. Why did the expert group diagnostics criteria mandatorily have a history of seafood market contact? The genes of the new coronavirus has no close genetic relationship with other viruses in the Sarbec virus subgenus. Virus has a special intermediate segment that no other coronavirus has. The paper clearly proposes that the Wuhan virus has the closest kinship with the Chinese military's two Zhoushan bat virus samples, CoV-ZC45 and CoV-XC21. Therefore, there is no reason that during the natural viral replication process, the S protein has various mutations, while the E protein remains completely similar with the entire host transformed. This is basically impossible to happen naturally. In a nutshell, Wuhan virus and Zhoushan virus showed this perfect consistency of E protein, which is difficult to explain with natural variation. S protein, the sequence of a key part of the S protein of the virus is highly homologous to the SARS virus. What is S protein? It is the small mushrooms on the surface of the virus in the pictures of coronaviruses that are already widely known. This S protein, also known as spike protein, is the most important tool for coronaviruses to invade human cells. A genetic variation that can be described with precision. It is like a key with 5 clamping teeth, of which the material of 4 teeth has changed, but the overall shape of the key is perfectly maintained, and the key can still open to the human body. The mid-sequence of its genome has never been seen before in coronaviruses and can encode a spike protein that invades host cells. According to the molecular evolution clock, Anderson calculated the time from when the virus in people first started to spread. The median was December 2nd, and the earliest could be October 1st. It was October 1st. Shi Zhengli, mystery of cross-species coronavirus infection. A remarkable fact is that the coronavirus carried by bats cannot directly infect the human body, let alone a virus that can possess human-to-human transmission. What is intriguing is that Shi Zhengli's research on the coronavirus S protein, the passport for infecting humans across species, began as early as 2010. This shows that Xi Zhengli's team had realized the special relationship between S protein and the ACE2 receptor. The S protein of the virus can bind to the human receptor ACE2 through the receptor binding RBD and effectively infect SARS virus directly to humans without the need for intermediate hosts such as a civet. Talking about the academic controversy, research on bat coronavirus and its interspecies infection. In other words, the extremely important new horseshoe bat virus RATG13, which is likely to be the culprit causing the plague, was frozen in the Wuhan P4 laboratory for 7 years. Why was the new horseshoe bat virus frozen for 7 years? No one knows the reason for this, but Shi Zhengli now reports she discovered the link between the virus and the Wuhan virus, no doubt trying to prove that this virus is the natural source of the Wuhan virus. Gene sequence of E protein can have a high elastic space. In other words, there is no strong selection pressure to force E protein to maintain the high fidelity of the entire protein gene sequence. Wuhan Institute of Virology, the epicenter of the coronavirus outbreak. There was some Sino-French collaboration. China has a secret biological weapons program. CCP has consistently denied possession of any offensive biological weapons, but the US State Department stated in a report last year that it suspected that the CCP government was engaged in a secret biological warfare research and development program. Then further to our investigation, recently in a very strange turn of events, renowned Canadian scientist Frank Plummer, who received the Saudi SARS coronavirus sample and was working on coronavirus vaccine in the Winnipeg-based Canadian lab from where the virus was smuggled by Chinese biowarfare agents and weaponized, has died in mysterious circumstances. Frank Plummer was the key to the Chinese biological espionage case at Winnipeg's National Microbiology Laboratory. Funnily enough, he died in Nairobi. So there's a lot of data in that. I'm not going to go through all the data points, but I suggest you do, because as I said in my analysis on the 1st of March, there's always more to it. This is what history consists of. It is the sum total of things they aren't telling us. Rabbit hole time, I've put together a list of a dozen times deadly pathogens like SARS and Ebola have escaped biosafety labs. That's from Scott Berg 777. If they can get you asking the wrong questions, they don't have to worry about the answers. A paranoid is someone who knows a little of what's going on, and I certainly do. Let's go to the currency markets. Euro, dollar 114.05, big move higher, dollar index 95.325, Japanese yen 102.63, big move in the yen, Swiss franc 0.9261, the pound 131. The Australian dollar 0.6534, India rupee 73.9975, South Korean won 1203.54, Rial fresh record low 462.70, Egyptian pound 15.5, and the rand 16.28. This is a dollar index chart from Friday via FX Pip Titan. Euro dollar chart as well from Friday. We're now at 114.05. The yen surged 2.5% to 102.80. China's most important trading partner is Germany for the 4th straight year. And when I was talking about the China EM frontier feedback loop phenomenon, and I said the phenomenon was positive for the last 2 decades, but now has undergone a trend reversal, I said the fallout is being experienced as far away as Germany Inc., and I think everyone is underestimating that linkage. As I said in my Africa Report article, fantasy predictions of a V-shaped recovery in China have been dashed. In fact, China cannot just crank up the factory because that will risk a second round effect of infections. The global airline industry is poised to have the worst year in history, worse than 2001 and the financial crisis. As I said, a V-shaped recovery is a fantasy. The Bloomberg Commodity Index is at its lowest since July 1986 and close to its low since inception. That's from John Althers. Gold is at 1670, buy as much as you can on retracements. Middle East stocks plunge as producers head towards oil price war. Kuwait led the sell-off. This is from Sunday, suspending trading of the biggest and most liquid shares after its index tumbled 10%. Basically, the Gulf is now junk. Saudi Aramco fell below its IPO price for the first time. Middle East markets are finding it difficult to cope with all these variables that have been happening over the past 10 days. Panic selling across the board, taking certain markets to lows not seen even during the financial crisis. Banking stocks got hammered. Saudi Arabia back to the level of November 2017, but going much lower. It was ultimately Putin as the winner in this battle, not Saudi Arabia. Kuwait's premier market index was down 20% year to date. That's before today. My article in the Africa Report refers debt, coronavirus and locusts create a perfect storm for Africa. I started the year began with promise for sub-Saharan Africa. All the major institutions tracking African growth said so. AFDB, real GDP growth estimated at 3.4% for 2019 is projected to accelerate to 3.9% in 2020. No chance. IMF, African growth is expected to strengthen to 3.5% 2020 to 2021. World Bank, expected to pick up to 2.9% in 2020. The World Bank put in a caveat, a sharper than expected deceleration in major trading partners such as China, Euro area or the United States would substantially lower export revenues and investment. A faster than expected slowdown in China would cause a sharp fall in commodity prices, and given sub-Saharan Africa's heavy reliance on extractive sectors for export and fiscal revenues, weigh heavily on regional activity. That forecast, that caveat is correct. All those forecasts are defunct and it's only March. Diagnostic kits were only recently availed, and if South Korea tested the same number of people as the entire African continent, they too would be reporting single-digit cases. What we're going to see is what Epsilon theory said, nothing, nothing, nothing. Cluster, cluster, cluster. We're already seeing the clusters, and then boom. Some people think the temperature is going to do something about it. I don't. As I said, the virus is not correlated to endogenous market dynamics, but is an exogenous uncertainty that remains unresolved, and therefore it is a black swan. Sub-Saharan African countries, with no exception I can think of, have gorged on borrowing. Balance sheets are maxed out. Very few of the investments are anywhere near producing a return on investment. South Africa reported GDP in Q4 2019 shrank by a massive 1.4%. That was before the virus has hit. So basically, I'm saying negative growth in the order of -2% in Nigeria, Angola, and South Africa, full year 2020. And then do your calculations. They are beneficiaries, Ethiopia, Kenya, big takers of oil. But overall, we're going to see a massive, massive reduction, a recession, if not a depression. And of course, in East Africa, we got the problem with the locusts. 2020 Nigeria budget is based on an oil price of $57 a barrel. We're currently at $30.40. Very interesting article about this doctor who's leading the coronavirus fight from isolation in Nigeria. He seems a really switched-on guy, Chikwe Ihekwezu. He's following his centre's own advice. Nigerians who recently travelled to countries hit by the virus should stay at home for 14 days, even if they don't have any symptoms. As I said, on the 24th of Feb, we're past the point of no return. Viruses exhibit non-linear and exponential characteristics. I have extreme concerns, not only about the economic blowback, but also about the coronavirus making landfall on the continent. It now has done. For me, Bolle is the epicenter of China-Africa connectedness. They've done now about 31 tests. And they're going to find a lot of cases once they start testing properly. Fitch Ratings has downgraded Angola to B-. They've probably got to downgrade them again. You don't have to be a rocket scientist or an economist to calculate which countries are directly in the line of fire. Angola, Congo, Brazzaville, DRC, Equatorial Guinea, Zambia, Nigeria, and South Africa spring immediately to mind. I said the Naira is gone. It's just a question of when. Nigeria's oil revenue is cratering. There is $16 billion of hot money parked in short-term certificates, which is all headed for the exit as we speak. A currency devaluation, I said, is now predicted and predictable. Oil price collapse might end up being worse than the coronavirus for youthful countries like Nigeria, Angola, Gabon, and Republic of Congo, says Charlie Robertson. I said Nigeria is Mexico 1994, Tessa Bono Redux, $16 billion in short-term certificates, all of which want out, and therefore that currency is gone. Moody's cuts its 2020 growth forecast for South Africa to 0.4%. It's going to be negative 2%. South African all shares down 8.79%, dollar rand gone. Egyptian pound 15.5, doing well. EGX 30 down 15.13%. Nigerian all share down 2.1%. Ghana Stock Exchange down 3.06%. How newsrooms in Kenya are framing the more than 1,000 words in these photo images. This is when the optics of something sends a message. We're entering a dangerous but decisive phase of this tragedy. The mercenaries have dug in and are daring for a fight. I believe we should determine the time, terms and conditions of engagement. Raila Odinga. Kenya shilling has depreciated by 1.6% against the dollar this year. And all of that happened after that announcement by the Central Bank of Kenya. On a year-to-date, shilling is down 1.2%. Stanbic PMI declined to 49. Kenyan new orders fell for first time in over 2 years. Weak money supply curtails demand. Output falls for second month in a row. Cost and inflationary pressures reach 6-month high. Nairobi all shares down 6.15%, but going to be limit down today, I would have thought. NSE is currently trading at a price to earnings ratio of 10.9. NSE 20 is down 9.56%. Thank you for listening.